Hello there. I hope you're well wherever you are. I've got a few different things to talk about today. One is from the 1931 version of Beelzebub's Tales. The second one is about working with higher hydrogens. And the third one is about Ouspensky's Wriver. So let's start with a quote from the very interesting and vivifying 1931 version of Beelzebub's Tales. Gurdjieff says, "And now, my dear, as yet only candidate for, so to say, future voluntary slaves, listen attentively and try your hardest without letting anything escape you, to transubstantiate in your common presence the information concerning the arising of the original cause, and also of those two events whose effects on the whole of me, having become by the will of fate, as contemporary scientists and pious pastors would say, vivifying, served as factors for the accomplished crystallization in my common presence of just those specific data, on account of which it may be said firstly that I am now an exceptional monster among the many millions of animals similar to me, and secondly, that as in the present period of my existence I must become a professional writer, I am compelled to employ this new profession of mine at whatever cost, as our esteemed Mullah Nasruddin has expressed it, to tangle and entangle all your, as you call them, images and notions you have until now acquired, and although they are your own attainments, are nevertheless, even in your frank opinion, very suspicious." Two things I notice in this section is Gurdjieff refers to himself as an exceptional monster, which brings to mind the idea that I was presenting a couple of weeks ago in the one with Shylock, about the animal inside of us turning to the light. It is the animal that needs to be convinced. And Gurdjieff's tradition is about the development of the animal and not of the head. And that's his insight, is that it is the animal inside of us that is in a bad condition, but somehow human beings have become obsessed with their head. And the other thing is about how Beelzebub's Tales actually works. Gurdjieff's saying here very clearly that he wants to disrupt the notions that you have about life. And he makes several appeals that you have to make an effort to really engage with the material. And only by doing that will new images enter into your centers, so that you can understand life a bit better. And two things I would say about that is, first of all, this is not an automatic process. You have to engage in it with all your heart. In the first chapter of Beelzebub's Tales and the different versions, Gurdjieff uses the word automatic and mechanical. And some people have imagined then that just by reading the book, magical things are going to happen to you. And the other thing to mention there is that just because you are disturbed, it does not mean that you have entered the spiritual path. And I think the notion that some people have that the book can mechanically fix all your problems is a wrong one, because the spiritual practices that you have to perform on yourself are different to a book that disturbs you. Now, the second thing I wanted to talk about is working with higher energies, and Gurdjieff has presented this very beautiful diagram, a diagram of everything living. And if I can take some quotes from Gurdjieff here, he says, "According to this diagram, every kind of creature, every degree of being, is defined by what serves as food for this kind of creature, or being of a given level, and for what they themselves serve as food, because in the cosmic order each class of creature feeds on a definite class of lower creature and is food for a definite class of higher creature. Each square denotes a level of being. The hydrogen in the lower circle shows what the given class of creature feeds on. The hydrogen in the upper circle shows the class which feeds on these features. And the hydrogen in the middle circle is the average hydrogen of this class, showing what these creatures are. Now let us suppose that we could improve the quality of food and air and feed, let us say, on hydrogen 384 instead of 768, and breathe hydrogen 96 instead of 192. How much simpler and easier the preparation of fine matters in the organism would be then. But the whole point is that this is impossible. The organism is adapted to transform precisely these coarse matters into fine matters, and if you give it fine matters instead of coarse matters, it will not be in a position to transform them, and it will very soon die. Improvement in this case would be actually making things worse. For instance, hydrogen 96 instead of 192 would be either very rarefied air or very hot incandescent gases, which man cannot possibly breathe. Fire is hydrogen 96. It is exactly the same with food. Hydrogen 384 is water. If a man could improve his food, that is, make it finer, he would have to feed on water and breathe fire. It is clear that this is impossible. Something that I take from this is that there is a gradual and humble transformation through all our parts to create all the links in the chain, and there aren't any shortcuts. When Gurdjieff was talking about breathing fire, it reminded me of something that happened a few days after he had his major car crash. From the secondary literature I'll read, it says, "When in October the torrid heat gave place to the bright warm days of autumn, he had his chair brought, and from this directed us to make huge wood fires in the open. Sitting, he would gaze into the flames for an hour or more. The idea was that he drew strength from the blaze. We all helped, and the blazing fires and our activities seemed to help him. This continued until it looked as if we should have to cut down half the forest to keep the fires going. Then one day he stopped us and began to watch us working, though without saying a word or seeming to recognize any of us." From one of my Qigong teachers I have this: "You normally take solid food and convert it into energy anyway. So with Qigong you are eating it direct, eating higher on the food chain. That's what you're really doing with Qigong. In order to eat it, you have to talk with the life force. Ask it, 'Please feed me, feed all my inner organs, feed my whole system.' If you ask sincerely, with your whole body-mind, the life force must respond. The 5 animals and 6 healing sounds clear out your own unconscious energy patterns, so you have room to eat something new. There are other Qigong forms that focus on the nourishing process, only taught sequentially in the other levels of Qigong." I'm going to talk a little bit about Ouspensky's Wrong River. As was revealed last week when I read out the discussion that Mary Seaton had with Ouspensky, it turns out that Ouspensky had not made work inside of him those things that he was teaching. Gurdjieff had said that this way of doing things has become normalized in the West. People teach things that they cannot themselves do. And so the West has degenerated into just talk, just appearances. And because you cannot do those things that you're teaching, you don't even know if they work. And Ouspensky had invented things that Gurdjieff did not teach and that were completely contradictory to Gurdjieff's teaching. One example of that is stopping negative emotions. This is a very commonly heard thing in all the visible groups around the world. This is a wrong instruction. If I can quote from Gurdjieff, in the first place it must be noted that normally in the sex center, as well as in the higher emotional and higher thinking centers, there is no negative side. In all the other centers, in the thinking, in the emotional, in the moving, in the instinctive, in all of them there are, so to speak, two halves, the positive and the negative, affirmation and negation, yes and no in the thinking center, pleasant and unpleasant sensations in the moving and instinctive centers. And so, listening to Gurdjieff there, how on earth could there be a practice where you deny the negative part of the emotional center, which is there and is meant to be there? How does that come to be that so many groups are doing this, when it is contradicted flatly in the primary text that they are following? What this means is that a very large number of people cannot read the words on the page and cannot follow them. Now, if we look at this diagram of the centers inside of us, the only ones that don't have negative parts are those that are connected vertically. It means the two higher ones that go up and this sex center that goes down. And so their polarity, which still exists, is vertical. Whereas for the other centers, which express themselves horizontally in the human world, their polarity is expressed inside the world, as the flow of positive and negative. And as it is described in Qigong then, the mastery of these horizontal centers is about the flow of the seasons, the rising and the falling, the interaction of yin and yang. That is how you master things horizontally. You master things by flowing with the seasons. When we're talking about stopping negative emotions, this of course is a way to become fake. This is self-calming. This is smiling when the roof is leaking. I'm afraid life is just not that easy. Something else interesting is that because the West seems to have fallen away from Christianity, which is devotional, you pray, you light the frankincense, and you pray to beautiful visions of the Virgin Mary, of the saints. Of course they do that in India and other spiritual traditions, even praying to your ancestors, or to the sun, or to the emperors of Rome. But the West seems to have fallen away from the sense of devotion and what should be taking place in the higher emotional center. Because that's what the higher emotional center is. It is devotion. It is the perfume of incense, beauty, the shimmering beauty of the divine. And the work of preventing negative emotions is trying to make what should happen on the top floor happen in the middle floor. Of course, another way of describing what people are doing is simply cowardice and a lack of knowledge of yourself, a lack of exploration of what is in your own heart, being too afraid to feel your pain, to not do the work of loving yourself and healing yourself. If I can quote Ouspensky once more, G did not explain that negative emotions were entirely unnecessary and that no normal center for them existed. So here Ouspensky is flatly refuting this blocking of negative emotions. Gurdjieff did see a copy of In Search of the Miraculous and liked that book. But in that book, Ouspensky had not started his blocking of negative emotions ideas. They only started later on, when he wrote a second book with the title of The Fourth Way, where he talks a great deal about blocking negative emotions that Gurdjieff had never seen that book. This also affects all the groups that come out of Maurice Nicole, who also come straight out of the wrong river of Ouspensky. For instance, Nicole says that Ouspensky taught that every part of a center is useful except for the negative part of the emotional center. And Ouspensky said very frequently that when you have negative emotions, that they are caused by an artificial center that doesn't really exist. Well, this is a flat contradiction and reversal of what Gurdjieff taught. It is a wrong teaching. And as I've said, if people follow this, they're most likely psychologically immature and cowardly, don't want to feel their pain. They're running away from themselves. I remember Jesus saying, "Blessed are those who mourn." Because of the law of three, we need to do something different than to run away from our pain or to wallow in it. But if we feel it sincerely, we can heal it, come to terms with it, of what it is, of our mortality, of our wounds. That is the way. It makes us feel small, but it makes us feel real. Yeah, that is the narrow gate. God be with you.